Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Brian McCabe. I'm General Manager for Definiti with oversight for our operations and client service teams. For those of you who are unaware, Definiti is a national retirement services firm specializing in defined contribution, defined benefit, cash balance, pension outsourcing, 316, and consulting services for more than 10,000 organizations across the country with more than 15 billion in assets under management. I'm delighted that you chose to register for this event that focuses specifically on Definiti's financial advisors and plan sponsors. I know how valuable your time is, so thank you for carving out part of your day to be here with us. We also know that without your partnership, we wouldn't be nearly as successful at delivering our services to the thousands of plan sponsors that count on us every day to help them meet their retirement plan needs. I'd now like to take a moment to recognize everyone that played a role in organizing this special event. This would not have been possible if it were not for their hard work and dedication. I'd also like to acknowledge the members of the Definiti Partners Cooperative for their sponsorship, thought leadership, and continued support. I cannot tell you how much we value your partnership. In order of their presentation today, Principal Financial, Penn Checks Trust, T. Rowe Price, Empower Retirement, Lincoln Financial Group, Voya Financial, John Hancock, American Funds, Transamerica, Securian Financial, and The Standard. Before we kick things off, I would like to mention a few housekeeping items for everyone. First, the advisor track of the Definiti Retirement Academy is about you. While we appreciate your registration and attendance during as many sessions as possible, we also understand that you may not be able to attend each and every one. We will be recording all sessions and they will be posted online for your access within 2 weeks of the event's conclusion. Second, I encourage you to submit questions via the chat feature within Zoom. Every effort will be made to answer these questions during the session. If time expires or if more time is needed to provide an appropriate response, Definiti will email attendees with responses after the sessions close. Third, your feedback is appreciated. Please do not hesitate to let us know how we did. And fourth, enjoy, have fun, and be engaged. Thank you for allowing me to kick things off today. At this time, I would now like to introduce my friend, Christabel Cook from Principal Financial Group. Christabel will be presenting on a topic that should not only be of the utmost importance to your firm, but also to the firms with whom you entrust your client relationships, cybersecurity. Christabel, the floor is yours.
Brian, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. I'm even more humbled that you called me your friend. So thank you for thank you for putting me in the friend box. I very much appreciate that. We could not be more excited at Principal to be a part of this amazing event that you guys have put together. I think all the efforts that go into providing virtual content and meaningful topics for individuals to be able to work with their clients and provide good solutions is certainly a benefit to all. So we couldn't be more excited and be more happy to be a part of your event today. So thank you for including us. At Principal, we put together retirement plan solutions to provide meaningful and successful retirement for all. And we do that through record keeping all different types of plans. So at Principal, we work with 401ks, non-qualified deferred comp, ESOPs, stock plan services, and defined benefit plans as well. So we cover all different types of plans at Principal, and that gives us the opportunity to make sure that we can provide good solutions for business owners and advisors to help their clients lead them to a successful retirement. I couldn't be more excited to share with you some thoughts on our cybersecurity. I am definitely a specialist, but I promise you I am not a specialist in cybersecurity. So I did get a wingman today. I have Mike with me here to really help go over some of our cybersecurity topics that I thought would be useful to share with you. Before I turn it over to him, though, I want to tell you just a little bit about some of the surveys and things that we have worked with our clients on recently and throughout the year. We do several different surveys and ask for feedback from our existing plan sponsor clients on what is important to them. And as an advisor working with business owners, I think it's really important to keep a pulse on what they're saying. So we found it very interesting that the sentiment from plan sponsors around retirement has changed through COVID. So I'm sure that not anyone would be surprised to know that lots has changed throughout the past couple years. But I'd like to highlight just a few of those things that have changed that through our surveying of these plan sponsors, they have really pointed out. One, first and foremost, they are lockstep focused on attraction and retention of talent, hands down. I found it also very interesting that even on CNBC today, they were doing a piece around what is important to the next generation, and benefits above and beyond salary is something that next generation is saying is really important in their job decisions, which job they take, which job that they accept. The percentage of individuals saying that the auxiliary benefits outside of just the salary alone. So if we looked back 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it would be resounding that the salary alone was the most important thing when a job seeker was surveyed on why they would choose to move or stay at an organization. That has slightly changed, that now they're very interested in the auxiliary benefits and other things that the company is willing to provide, not just taking a sole lens on that salary, which is great because that leads us to a conversation that allows you to pull together information for your client to help them with their number one thing they're having a challenge with, which is attracting and retaining their talent. Great way to do that is through really talking to them about how the retirement plan fits in as part of their benefits and how they can continue to sell that from an attraction and retention perspective. So that's the number one kind of thing that we saw from plan sponsors that has changed. Historically, plan sponsors have been very focused on how could they get their own tax benefits or how could they provide a retirement plan benefit to their employees. But it's really shifting on what they're looking for today. And that's really just around that attraction and retention tool. The second thing that they were very lockstep and interested in when it came to the retirement plan and what they're thinking about is their plan for the future. What are they going to do? As a business owner, they're very interested in what their succession plan is. They're very interested in how they're going to manage their finances and how they're going to manage the organization going forward. And that had a lot to do, there was an auxiliary question on there that was all about interest rates and how borrowing money has gotten more expensive, different things like that. So a bunch of different things that went into that. But they're very interested in what their plan forward is and what their succession plan is going to be in the future. That obviously can always tie into a retirement plans offering discussion and around how to plan for that. And then not surprisingly, and how we landed on our speaker today was that they're very interested in and curious and wanting to protect themselves from cybersecurity. So from cyber attacks and how that, how keeping their data safe is really, really important. So those are some of the things that we heard through our surveying that is important to the plan sponsors. And therefore, we wanted to provide you with some content today around cybersecurity, what you should be looking for, and then how you can take this information and share this with your prospective clients or your existing clients to help them deal with this challenge. So today, as I said, I am certainly not the cybersecurity expert. So we have lined up one of our best cybersecurity speakers, who is Mike. I couldn't be more excited to have him with us today to be able to share some of the insights around cybersecurity with us. Mike is the Business Information Security Officer within our retirement silo inside of Principal Financial Group. He drives the business-specific operations of technology and processes within that organization and alignment with Principal's overarching information security program. Mike holds a number of cybersecurity industry and business designations, including the CISSP, which I learned is the Certified Information Systems Security Professional, and many other designations that he also has. He's a member of several industry groups and presented on a variety of different information security topics at different industry conferences for many years. He's also a graduate of Simpson College and Boston University. Don't hold that against him. And Mike has built and operated several cybersecurity programs at mid-sized organizations in the past as VP and Chief Information Security Officer roles. And he just recently joined Principal within, I think, the last 6 months. If I'm off on my timing, Mike, feel free to clean me up. And he started his career 30 years ago as a member of the U.S. Air Force Security Police. So, Mike, thank you for your service. And I would like to have you pop up maybe your presentation and then hopefully get you to take off and running with some cybersecurity information that we can share today.
That sounds great, Christabel. Thank you for that great introduction. For the Definiti folks, would you like to go ahead and drive, or would you like me to share out?
You can go ahead and share out.
Okay. Give me just
that way you'll be able to move the slides as you see fit, and you won't have to tap your nose or pull on your ear to let anybody know when you'd want to make the slides move.
Sure. Give me just a moment here to
Sure.
Too many things open at one time here. All right. Very good. Christabel, can you just confirm that's coming through for you okay?
Absolutely. We can see that perfectly, and we can hear you very well as well, Mike. So thank you very much.
Let's take it away. So talk about cybersecurity. I'm always required by our compliance folks to put this brief disclaimer up on the screen here for just a moment. I'm sure you've all read this. So we'll move on from there. So why care about cybersecurity? A lot of good examples, obviously, on the screen here. Long and short is it that your customers want to do business with organizations they trust. A cybersecurity breach, a data breach of some sort, does not engender trust, obviously. So Principal is proud to report in 140 years of business, we've experienced no material data security breaches. And that comes through a certain diligence and a certain level of control environment to make that happen. So other examples on here, certainly reputation damage, business disruption. Regulatory fines are only increasing, right? So the Department of Labor, as the regulatory body over ERISA governed plans, they are definitely starting to step in and to regulate against their recently released cybersecurity best practice list. And I'll take you through that here in just a moment. But and then expenses to remediate, right? It is not cheap to hire folks like myself, to hire cyber forensic firms, to pay clients annual, yearly credit monitoring and protection through LifeLock and similar to that. So cyber insurance does play a part in this. We'll talk about that as well. But unfortunately, it does not cover all the costs that cannot be easily quantified, right? Those non-quantifiable pieces or qualified expenses like business disruption are becoming increasingly difficult for insured organizations to get their carriers to actually cover. So why so much interest in cybersecurity? Excuse me. So you can see the graphic on here. we're seeing the list volume of compromised records increase by 224% since 2017. It would be the same number or in that ballpark from 2012, from 2005. A big phenomenon happened back in the mid to late 90s, and all of us took these systems that had largely been islands within our data centers, within our specific businesses, these corporate networks, we plugged them all up to the internet. We wanted to get some degree of benefit and value from the great capabilities the internet brought to bear, right? So internet banking, the ability to share information more freely. I mean, the internet has been a wonderful thing for many, many people. What happened though is now we've exposed that to 6-7 billion people throughout the world. And a number of them found out that we can make software work in a way that it's not intended to. When a developer writes software, they test it to ensure that it does what they built it to do. They don't necessarily test to see that it doesn't do anything out of the ordinary or anything that would give unauthorized access, anything like that. And we found out in the late 90s timeframe into the early aughts that these software packages now exposed to the internet do provide a degree of risk for us. And we started to see a lot of data breaches start to occur. Early days, you'd have somebody out there write some sort of a virus or malware, and they would put it out there in the wild and see how far they could get it to spread. Did not take long, only a few years, for threat actors to figure out, oh, I could actually make money off of this. I'm going to start going after credit card companies, financial institutions, retailers, to either pull money out of those financial institutions directly or to get information that I could use in identity theft to go out there and purchase something fraudulently from a retailer of some sort, turn around and sell that and convert that to cash, right? A newer version of the fraud that we've seen in the credit card industry space for decades prior to cybersecurity really becoming a discipline. So let's talk about the threat landscape. So common threats we see in 2022. Ransomware, you'll hear me use that term a lot throughout this presentation, unfortunately has become almost the defining risk concern that we have within the cybersecurity space. Certainly not the only one, but it is driving incredible losses for cyber insurers, for organizations, and all that. So when I say ransomware, just to put a little definition around that, essentially what threat actors have done is they have found a way to use a fantastic security technology called encryption and use that against us. We use it all day long in my profession to protect data. They're now using that against an organization to go through, encrypt that data so that it's no longer readable in kind of human readable or machine readable format. It's now gobbledygook. You can only get it back to its legitimate form by paying them a ransom to get the key back to decrypt that data. We'll talk more about that in a future slide here in just a moment, but a couple of good examples. I live in central Iowa. It's where Principal is based at. We've had both our largest community college here and one of our hospital systems hit by ransomware just within the last couple of years. The hospital was hit just within the last couple of months here, and it's really been detrimental to their ability to provide care. Distributed denial of service, this is kind of geek speaky, but essentially what happens here is you have a bunch of systems, generally endpoints, so user desktops, laptops, they get infected with malware. If you get enough of those combined within a single kind of network, threat actor owns the ability to be able to tell those computers what to do, kind of unbeknownst to the user. We call it a botnet. Any one of those machines that's compromised, is what we call a bot. When you put maybe thousands or tens of thousands of those machines together, you've got a very large botnet. Bad guy can go out there and say, I want you to go against this particular website and just throw garbage data against it. If you get enough machines, computers doing that, it can bring those services down. It's not as much a confidentiality concern from a data breach standpoint. It's more rendering that service or that website unavailable for use by legitimate customers. We see that it's a bigger trend back maybe 10 years ago or so, continues to go on though, and the scale is increasing dramatically because of new ways they can use reflection technologies within, within the technology space to make them even more devastating. We're talking attacks in the gigabit range, whereas before that would have been inconceivable. So definitely a trend that we're still continuing to see. Again, render systems unavailable for use by legitimate customers. Phishing, smishing. I'm sure everyone on today's webinar has gotten tons of phishing emails. You may be getting them as text messages now, what we call smishing or short message service. Seeing a lot of that continuing as well. As Christabel pointed out, I'm relatively newish to Principal. It only took about a month or so for bad guys to figure out that this guy, it works for Principal, and then sent me a text claiming to be Dan Houston, our CEO, asking me to buy him some Apple gift cards. So having diligence and understanding what a phishing email looks like, understanding what an illegitimate text message looks like when it comes from somebody claiming to be an executive at your organization. Absolutely critical for employees to understand what we call the social engineering threat, which primarily manifests itself for staff in the form of phishing emails and increasingly phishing text messages. And then credential stuffing. So going out there and attempting to create an account, register an account, take over an account by using fairly advanced technology to automate, trying to understand what the password is for a particular user, where single factor authentication is largely the primary way of logging into, say, a website or something like that. So again, the threat landscape kind of today, the primary trends we're seeing are in those four. So when we talk about breaches occurring, what are we seeing? So roughly about 60% are happening through network intrusion. Again, the comment that I made at the beginning there about we all plugged our systems up to the internet, you can go out there and scan a large swath of the internet as a threat actor, bad guy, black hat, whatever you want to call them. Go out there and scan those to identify vulnerabilities within those technologies. Maybe it's something that something wasn't patched properly, or it's some sort of a configuration within the web application code that allows for certain exploits to take place. They'll then overtake that and essentially find their way into the network so they can get after much more sensitive locations like data storage areas. We also see 24% in phishing. So again, that social engineering threat, absolutely critical. Then we've got kind of the bulk, the remainder of that is a smaller portion, again, stolen, lost device or records, access to a cloud asset, et cetera. When we talk about the threat actors, the bad guys, the black hats, all that, it's really kind of four primary groups that we talk about. The first two are criminal in nature. They're monetarily focused. The first is unaffiliated hacking groups. So these are individuals who've got a deep technical skill set, sitting in places that are well beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement and extradition treaties. So think about places like Belarus, obviously North Korea, anybody on the OFAC list. They're operating largely with kind of state sanctioned or under state cover to allow them to get in and kind of do their dirty deeds, right? So again, they are financially motivated. These are criminals who before may have been conducting general fraud with card present transaction type thing, counterfeiting. They moved online. Second group, again, also profit motivated, very similar to the first, but this group is affiliated with organized crime. So think Cosa Nostra, Russian mafia, that sort of thing. Where there's money to be made, rest assured organized crime is going to get involved. And we are seeing that within that profit motive space. Third group, less of a concern in the retirement industry field, but really what we call hacktivism. So individuals who've got some degree of social concern or complaint against specific organizations, they'll hack away at an organization, essentially trying to trip them up, call them out, get information that they can use to publicly shame them. There's not a whole lot of folks who have got some degree of an ethical complaint against the retirement industry, right? We're helping people to save money for their retirement. When you talk about oil and gas, maybe makers of cigarettes, there you've got more of a social cause type thing. That's where these hacktivist groups tend to spend their time. Increasingly with Russia's aggression against Ukraine, we're seeing a lot of those organizations, a lot of those groups go after Russia specifically because of the perceived injustice, if you will. And then the last group is one that probably concerns us the most. It is state-sponsored hacking organizations. So these are groups that are involved in a lot of cyber espionage. That may be trying to get trade secrets from businesses, trying to get secret information from government organizations. Here in the US, think a lot of the three-letter acronymed government organizations, FBI, NSA, and so forth. Not a gigantic concern for the retirement space in that area. We're not defense contractors. We don't have trade secrets that they can use against us, but certainly in the ransomware space. A number of these countries, obviously on the OFAC list, have been excluded from the legitimate economy because of sanctions. So North Korea, Russia, Iran, countries like that, they have got groups that are fully state-sponsored, fully state-funded, where if they can go out there and quietly try to find ways to drive revenue in through ransomware or things like that, they are using that, those governments are using that as a way to help fund and kind of fill some of the holes left by the sanctions that have kept them really largely outside of the legitimate economy. So industry's impacted. It's always an interesting slide to talk about. If you had told me back when I started doing this 22 years ago that in 2022, education, healthcare, and manufacturing would lead the way in terms of data breaches and industry impact events, I would have told you were nuts. There's no way that you can monetize the information pulled out of a university, out of a hospital, manufacturing organization, in the same way that you can a financial institution, a retailer who, again, you can purchase things fraudulently, sell those for cash. This all comes really down to one word, and that's ransomware, right? So what they're finding is organizations like Principal, other financial institutions, we've had years and years to get our houses in order. We've been forced to because of regulation. We've been forced to because of fraud impacts that we've experienced with losses coming through. So having to really kind of figure out, what does cybersecurity mean? Get that control infrastructure in place. If you look at a hospital, if you look at a university, any sort of healthcare system, manufacturing, that regulatory level of that regulatory bar is not set that high and hasn't been traditionally. So they're a much softer target in a lot of cases than, say, a financial institution. So bad guy goes out there and scans a large swath of the internet, finds systems that are vulnerable within these organizations, and this is fully automated, calls back to a command and control server at their kind of headquarters location, if you will. They then come back in and start doing either an automated attack or manual attack, with the idea of exfiltrating or pulling that data out of the system, out of that organization's systems, and then encrypting the data as well. So not only have they encrypted it, but they've got a set of data that they can now go out there and sell on the dark web. So pretty nefarious stuff. You know, in the healthcare space, we are seeing them actively targeting hospitals because they know, rightfully so, that if they go out there and encrypt data, it's going to render systems unable to function, right? You could have people on life support whose systems that are keeping them alive may not be able to function. Bad guys are actively targeting them, knowing that, you know, this is a question of, you know, a matter of life and death. It increases the likelihood that hospital is going to pay that ransom. Obviously, people's lives are at stake. The losses from lawsuits are going to ramp up, all that sort of thing. So there is no honor among thieves here at all. If it is a life and death situation, that may actually make it an industry that they're going to be more likely to go after. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to skip over this graphic. So, you know, what's been happening in the space, right? So you can see, this is a very busy slide, I know, but you can see how things are ramping up from a data, you know, breach, data loss standpoint. So to the point that I made earlier, we're not seeing a great deal of financial institutions. Certainly Capital One is on here, but we're seeing that, you know, increasingly threat actors going after much larger organizations. You got the Facebooks on there, Google, that sort of thing. The traditional representation that you would see maybe 10, 15 years ago of a lot of retailers, a lot of financial institutions, not necessarily the case so much anymore. We've all gotten better at keeping them out, and they're going after softer targets now to get the information that they can use more so for social engineering attacks down the road. All right, so threat landscape versus risk appetite. So risk appetite, you know, how much risk are we willing to take on as an organization versus the actual threat landscape that's out there? Every organization has a mission. Obviously, if you are a healthcare provider, it's to, you know, treat people and save lives. If you are, you know, the military, obviously it's national defense. If you're in a business space, it's to serve your customer, but ultimately it's to make money, right? A lot of terrific technologies out there, a lot of fantastic advancements in the last 10, 15 years with our ability to meet our customers where they want to be, the ability to interact on mobile devices. You have to be able to leverage that. It's not enough to say, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and just not do these things. I'm going to bury my head in the sand, keep all my systems off the internet. You will lose from the competitive standpoint very clearly. So it's a matter of understanding what is the control environment, what are the things that we can do to effectively protect our organization from a data security incident, while at the same time being able to meet our customers where they are and have a successful business relationship with them. So it's finding that balance between risk and operation. The good news is, if I go back about maybe 22 years ago or so, I'll be the first to admit we were kind of fumbling around in the dark, right? We plugged all these things up to the internet and started seeing bad things happen. We didn't know exactly kind of what to do, right? If I go forward now to the early, the mid-aughts or so, into the last decade, and certainly now, we know what the science is that makes up data security, cybersecurity. It's a matter of actually putting that into action and making that a reality that really separates those who are going to be successful in that space versus those that aren't. And I'll give you some resources toward the end of the presentation here to give you a better feel for what those resources are and their availability. A couple of common fraud trends we're seeing in the retirement industry. So business email compromise and account takeover. The account takeover piece is relatively straightforward. If I look at my own information that's out there and it's been compromised through data breaches in the past, I can look at Equifax, IRS, Office of Personnel Management, because I served in the military years ago. my information is fully available on the dark web. It's very unlikely that anyone on the call here doesn't have some degree of your information freely available out there that can be purchased for a relatively trivial amount of money, like $10 or so. So somebody goes out there on the dark web, their intent is to try to get into Mike Bedeau's retirement accounts, my banking accounts, that sort of thing, going through and registering for accounts that maybe were set up for me that I didn't actually go through and register and create my multi-factor authentication, create my secret account answers, that sort of thing. Big concern in that space. Business email compromise. So the social engineering, the phishing email space, this is a huge one in terms of bad guys trying to gain access to a legitimate user's email account. One of the scenarios that's common to see is threat actor goes out there on LinkedIn, finds, say, the senior financial users or executives within an organization, sends a social engineering email to them, finds a way to get access to that executive's email account information, now say the CFO. They then will, once they've got that access, they may drop an email off to somebody internally within the organization saying, hey, we're about to go through an acquisition right now. I can't tell you anything about it because it's super secret, and I'm not going to be available to talk to you about it for the next 2 days because I'm in conversations with that business and their attorneys. So I'm going to be completely offline, but I need you to go ahead and wire $3 million to this particular routing number so we can make this transaction go through. It sounds a bit unrealistic, but unfortunately, threat actors are having a lot of success with that because the underling, if you will, in accounting who has responsibility for sending wire transfers, they're going to see that email coming through from a legitimate source. They've been told not to talk to anybody else about it. And by gosh, they can trust that. So all of a sudden, the company finds itself out $3 million. So business email compromise has been something that's been around for quite a number of years now. It's only continuing to go up. And again, it speaks to the need to have those conversations with staff and say, this is the social engineering risk. This is what it means to you. If you've got the means to give them the ability to practice that by sending them test phishing emails so they can see that and then recognize and then report that and just kind of practice in a safe environment, really powerful technique to help them to understand and learn what the risk of a social engineering email is, a phishing email, and recognize what attributes make up the most concerning pieces of a phishing email. So how has the industry responded? It really, in one word, regulation, right? So we're seeing more and more regulatory requirements come down. If you look at, say, the credit card space or the financial institution space, you started to see things like the payment card industry, data security standard, PCI DSS within the credit card world, Visa, MasterCard, Amex. They went out and created that some years back as an opportunity, or as a means to start to stem the losses and the loss of confidence within the electronic funds transfer industry. You started to see things like Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, things like that pop up to force financial institutions to get their houses in order. And this is going back, again, 15, 20 years ago or so. Within the insurance space, New York's Department of Financial Services, essentially the state insurance regulator, they came out with a cybersecurity regulation. We're starting to see under the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, they've put out model cybersecurity regulations so that the other 49 state departments of insurance have a model with which they can start to regulate their domiciled insurance organizations located within their state. So the regulation in industries that would have been maybe a bit lighter in the past, really starting to ramp up. And that's not going to change anytime soon. That's only going to continue to grow. So Spark Best Practices, Society of Professional Asset Record Keepers, really the kind of the primary advocacy and lobbying group within the retirement industry, came out with a list of about 15, 16 best practices to help participants to understand here are the things that you really need to be thinking about and doing to be able to protect your organization from a cybersecurity concern. And you should be having these conversations with your plan administrators, any sort of third party that you're sharing any sort of your data with, so that you can understand what their security posture is. Principal played a part in helping to define those along with a number of organizations. That did ultimately find its way into the Department of Labor's guidance on cybersecurity. Sparks, they call it the Data Security Oversight Board, which created that list. They essentially worked with the Department of Labor to come up with what those best practices were, and DOL translated that into what their best practice list is. I'll show you that list here in just a moment, but some things to think about, as far as guidance on cybersecurity, what plan advisor, what an organization should be doing around the cybersecurity space from a due diligence standpoint, helping plan sponsors, fiduciaries, select service providers with strong cybersecurity practices, and then keep an eye on what they do, right? So if we're seeing any sort of a concern, they've released publicly they had a breach of some sort. If they're doing things when interacting with you that really isn't a good idea, sending very confidential client information through email, unencrypted, those are practices that need to warrant a conversation with that provider so you can understand what their cybersecurity requirements are. Department of Labor is going to expect that. Cybersecurity program best practices. Again, I mentioned that we know what makes up good, solid cybersecurity. Here at Principal, we align to something called the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. The model is 800.53, very, very deep cybersecurity control framework, probably a bit too complex for smaller organizations, mid-sized organizations. That's where things like Spark, that's where things like the Department of Labor's best practices can really be beneficial to understand cybersecurity kind of at that higher level, right? If I can do these things, I'm protecting myself reasonably well from becoming the next target. And then online security tips. So, where you've got plan participants, beneficiaries, doing some degree of education or sending out information to them to educate them on what they should be doing, right? If you're enrolled in this plan and you haven't yet gone out there and registered with, X.com, whoever that plan administrator is, go out there and do that. Set up your multi-factor authentication. Go out there and answer the questions to the answers to secret questions so that only you know that. So if a fraud actor does capture your information through a past breach, anything like that, and they try to contact that plan admin to say, I'd like to go ahead and take a distribution from my account, they'll be able to thwart that attack because you've got multi-factor set up on your phone. You've got those answers in there. It's just better security. So, helping them to understand that, and then also certainly advocating, you can go out there and balance your portfolio. You can set up your asset allocations, all that sort of thing. It's a win-win all the way around. So again, the Department of Labor best practices, that's really the next two slides here. I won't go into detail around these, but certainly, as you have those conversations with third parties, as you look at the security posture of your own organization, it's a great list to start with. Again, relatively high level overall, but it can really generate some really good conversation to say, what are we doing in this space? So for your own organization, if you're so empowered to have this discussion, certainly reach out to the person who's accountable for cybersecurity within your org and say, hey, look, what are we doing around these things? If there's a lot of fumbling around in response, or, well, we don't have time really to get after that stuff, it probably needs to drive a deeper conversation to say that, this stuff is pretty important. These are kind of the basics. We're not getting into a lot of, geek speak and all that sort of thing, but maybe we should have some further dialogue around what we can do and potentially look to bring in an outside consulting firm or contractor. They can pick up some of that burden for you if you don't have that skill set internally within your organization. Okay, DOL and Spark best practices built on these two principles. Consumers should be provided standard cybersecurity information, and then basic cybersecurity information should be validated by trusted independent third parties. So where you're speaking with a third party, certainly a large organization like Principal, you can ask to see what's called their SOC 2 Type 2 report. We're all very familiar with the SOC 1 report, financial health, readiness, solvency of a particular organization that we're partnering with. The SOC 2 Type 2 allows you to kind of peek under the covers and get into the checking of the organization's math relative to cybersecurity. Not every organization is going to offer a SOC 2 Type 2. There are alternatives. You can send them a questionnaire, ask for their response back on that. But a lot of organizations are going down that SOC 2 Type 2 route because it is conducted by an independent third party. Principal's case, we use one of the big four auditing firms, but looks at not only the design effectiveness, how well is their cybersecurity control set designed, but also looks at the operating effectiveness of those controls over a 3 to 12-month period. So really a great way to understand how an organization is operating from a cybersecurity standpoint against what's called the common criteria. So we're not being assessed under one set of controls versus maybe say a competitor of ours being assessed under a different set of controls. It's largely the same control set, so you can get an apples to apples comparison. All right, what's coming next in this space? Continued expansion of guidance, additional regulations. It's not going to slow down. We're not going to see the Department of Labor back off. We're not going to see any other organizations kind of have regulatory requirements. We're not going to see any of them step down or step back their oversight. That's only going to continue unabated into the future. Their hand's been somewhat forced from this point because we are not seeing any sort of reduction in the volume of data breaches that we're seeing. The ransomware threat that's come along has definitely ramped things up too, because you've got groups, organizations, functions that are involved in critical infrastructure that are now being hit by cybersecurity concerns a la ransomware that really had kind of been largely outside of that space in the past. So I think we all recall the oil pipeline on the East Coast, I believe it was Colonial, that was largely shut down for a number of weeks because of a ransomware outbreak. That led to long lines for gas stations trying to get fuel. That's a real world impact. If we start to see power grids, anything that really is in the critical infrastructure space, that could be tremendously detrimental to any community. Certainly, we haven't so with Russia, right? So we've sanctioned Russia very heavily. We had some concerns earlier this year timeframe that they would start to unleash some attacks on the United States because of our role in the heavy sanctioning and the supplying of weapons to the Ukrainians. That really hasn't manifested itself. Not to say that it won't, but in a scenario like that, ransomware would be a huge impact to a lot of organizations that provide critical services to all Americans. So some takeaways in this space, and I'll probably go into a little bit of detail about some control examples too that Principal follows, just to give you a better feel for how we interact with our clients, be it through our website or through our phone experience. But in your business, educating your employees on the email risk. We talked about that, right? Social engineering is a huge concern. Why would a hacker want to go through all the witchcraft and wizardry of hacking into a system through technical means if they can just get somebody to give up their user ID and password, particularly if it's a single factor authentication type of login? So social engineering, a huge risk. Tell your staff what to look for, help to train them up on that. And there's a lot of freely available resources out there that can help with that. System patching. This is one of the 101 basics of cybersecurity. If you're running technologies in your environment, you need to keep those technologies up to date. All day long, new vulnerabilities are being found within all sorts of technologies, making the software do something it wasn't intended to do. The manufacturer of that software then says, okay, here's a way to fix that. You need to update your systems. Increasingly, a lot of organizations are very, very poor at doing that. Their concern is if I make that update, it's going to break functionality for users. It's going to make the system do something it shouldn't do. So you'll find systems being months, years, potentially even longer out of date. So patching on a regular basis, absolutely fundamental, have to do it. Incident response plan, right? What are we going to do if we do have an incident? Are we going to contact attorneys? Are we going to contact a cyber forensic firm? Which firms can we talk to? Even the basics, right? Who would I talk to if I found out about this as a technology person? Do I contact my manager? Do I contact the executive team? How are they going to have interactions with our board of directors? Doing tabletops, talking through what those scenarios are and what sort of decisions you would make. Very, very helpful. Backup. So in the ransomware space, I guess some good news to report. Many of the control components we talked about, like patching, similar, they apply to data breach, they apply to ransomware within the same space. There's no separate control set that you would do for ransomware versus data security breach. There's a lot of overlap. But in the case of backups are absolutely critical for ransomware. So if the bad guy gets in there and encrypts your data, if you've got a clean set of data that is reasonably up to date, maybe you last backed that up within the last 12, 24 hours, you've got that clean set of data set off somewhere else. That means you can access that, pull that data back in, and get back to operation again very quickly. Critical, though, that backup data is kept in an offline state. Maybe it's only updated once every 24 hours, and maybe it's physically connected by somebody with an Ethernet cable who says that I can back up that system. What we see bad guys doing is getting in there, encrypting the live or production data, and then looking around trying to figure out where your backups are at, going in there and then encrypting that data as well, because they know that backup is a very effective compensating control against the work that they've done. We talked about vetting third parties, right? Talking to third-party providers of yours to find out what they're doing from a security standpoint, ensure that they've got their houses in order. Not using social security number as an internal identifier. We probably have, 10,000 John Smiths here within our account records here. And obviously using social security number because it's unique helps to define one John Smith from the other. Not a great practice overall, though, because obviously that information is very, very confidential and used by many organizations and very detrimental to the participant whose information could be compromised. Personal advice, we talked about registering online accounts, not reusing passwords. Consider a password vault. I mean, how many of us are guilty of using the same password at multiple different websites, right? So maybe you're using it for your retirement plan website, you're using it for your online banking site, you're using it for Facebook. Bad guy learns one password, they can now access obviously multiple different sites. So I know passwords are very difficult to remember. I'm sure many folks are writing them down. There's a lot of great technologies out there, LastPass, KeyPass, there's new ones coming online all the time, where you can create one master, pretty complex, strong password on your side. And that thing will manage all of your passwords to all of your social media sites, your banking sites, all that sort of thing. Create very complex passwords, rotate them for you automatically. All you have to remember is that one main password for your, again, LastPass, KeyPass, whatever you decide to use. That's all you have to remember. Everything else is managed behind the scenes. So reusing passwords, just not a great idea. Two-factor authentication, cannot emphasize that enough. Because it's hugely important within, for defeating the social engineering risk, right? Somebody tries to log into your Gmail account, somebody tries to log into your Amazon account, whatever. Having that password, that secondary password through two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, whatever you want to call it, absolutely critical. So, a couple of things, just very briefly, I want to leave a few minutes for questions at the end, but a couple of things that a lot of plan admins are doing as far as interacting with clients through websites, through their proprietary website, where you've got a distribution request come through, that's where we're seeing the fraud take place, right? So does a plan administrator have the ability through a technology to be able to look at an ACH transaction, direct deposit from the carrier off to the bank for the distribution location? Do they have technology in place to identify red flags? Maybe going to a bank account that was set up in the last 2 weeks, or the name on the account is registered to a different name than the participant holder. So do they have those controls in place? Having obviously multi-factor authentication for logging into the client portal, the ability potentially to use multi-factor authentication as part of the authentication process for a phone-based conversation would be helpful as well. A lot of our products that we sell are fairly complex financial instruments. A lot of times participants want to talk to somebody to ask questions and have a dialogue versus just looking at a website. The ability to confirm that a phone call coming in is coming from the legitimate phone number that we have on file for the participant versus a hacked voice over IP system. It's called spoofing the phone number. So, putting in Mike Bedow's cell phone number to make it look like I'm the one calling in. It's fairly trivial to do over a hacked voice over IP system. It's how a lot of organizations, when they call you, you probably noticed they're calling from your home area code to make it more likely that you'll pick up. That's what they're using in those cases. And then ultimately, moving beyond the CAPTCHA component, we've all seen the screens when going to a website where you've got maybe 6 images and you have to pick every one that includes a picture of a lamppost. That's getting to be kind of old school. There's technologies that exist today where we can go out there and see, is this person on the other end of the browser, are they interacting with it the way that a human being would, or does it look like it's an automated feature or an automated attack of some sort through a bot component? So free services from the Department of Homeland Security, you can see some of these pieces here where you want to get more information. There are some great resources available through the Cyber Readiness Institute, really kind of targets the small and mid-sized business segment with freely available toolkits, all kinds of resources that you can use in that space. We're members of that board because we believe in it so deeply, but Cyber Readiness Institute is that organization. Other one I'll leave you with is called CISA.gov. It's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Basically, it's a cybersecurity arm of the Department of Homeland Security. If you go out to CISA.gov, they've got some great information in their tool sets as well. There's a lot of information very quickly, I know, and I move very quickly as well. So are there questions that I can answer today around cybersecurity? Anything you'd like to know more about?
Hello, Mike. Yes, we did get a few questions submitted via chat here. The first one is, on average, how many attacks do you see on a daily basis?
So it's a really good question. It's going to vary dramatically based on the size of the organization, their industry, that sort of thing. I can tell you, so I don't want to get too into it, but there's events, there's incidents, and there's a breach, right? It's an escalating level. We've probably had 10 or 20,000 technology events here at Principal just in the time of this webinar. Very few of those escalated to incidents, and very few of none of those escalated to a breach, certainly. So it's getting that visibility into your environment. But I would say over the course of a day, typical organization could have 100,000 events, again, taking place where somebody is trying something malicious, nefarious against their website to try and hack in. So it's very automated, it's very random, but they're scanning large swaths of the internet, just trying whatever they can.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question. Does Principal partner with TPAs without cybersecurity or without a cybersecurity strategy in place?
Does Principal partner, I'm not to unfortunately claim ignorance on that. I don't know the answer to that question. We'd have to research and follow up on that. I guess the degree of due diligence we do against third-party advisors, I don't want to misspeak on it, so I'm going to have to punt on that one. We'll research that.
Okay, so for whoever asked that question, we'll go ahead and get clarification on that answer, and then we'll send out the follow-up emails later on next week with answers to those questions.
Excellent.
All right. So, any more questions that we have from anyone? Okay. Well, once again, let me go ahead and say thank you to Principal Christabel and Mike for talking to us about cybersecurity and protecting our business.